Welcome. Super excited for this is the first monologue um, of this podcast. I'm super excited to just really open up with you guys, right? And just just drop into my heart and really take an opportunity to talk about a lot of things that I've been experiencing. So before we dive in, I just want to thank you guys for showing up. As always, this is for you. I'm not here to glorify my story or to be in any sort of morbid reflection or anything like that. The whole intention here is to really just walk you through a lot of my experiences and the experiences when we have guests to add value to your life, right? To add value to what it is that you're walking through. Look for similarities. That's the one big thing I've always learned is when I look for the similarities rather than the differences, I have such an incredible experience in my life. So that's my intention for you today. And today's about being raw, about being authentic, about just walking through this conversation as real as I can. I literally was sitting here trying to get some of my intro music to work, and it's not working. I was like, okay, it's just not supposed to work. I'm just supposed to dive into this and start talking, and not be attached to what it's supposed to look like, is really what it's about. So with that being said, guys, we're going to dive in today. So first thing I want to just open up about, this this episode specifically was supposed to be recorded like about 3 or 4 days ago. I was actually supposed to launch 3 days ago. And the big reason that I'm bringing that up is because like life gets busy, right? Like a lot of stuff comes up, right? A lot of stuff's happening. I was traveling last week. I was visiting family, which I'll dive into some of that with you guys, and just like work and family stuff and pets and all the things. And then like the further it gets away from me, the harder it is for me to like sit down, set that time aside and make it happen. Right. And so that was one of the things I want to talk to you guys about today, was just like, like really the ability to see like where in my life is it that there's things that I want to get done that are important to me. It's not even like I don't value, I value this so much. And I appreciate my ability to go in here and connect with you guys and just make time for this, because really like I grow and I learn, and like my first two guests, Gianna and Jacob, have been phenomenal to have conversations with, and I'm seeking other amazing people to join and come share their story and have these awesome conversations with. But it's so funny how something that's so important to you, it's so easy to let it slip away, and I want to be honest with you guys. This isn't like some facade, right? I don't want to be coming on this podcast and make like, hey, yeah, everything's great in life and we're perfect, because that would totally defeat the purpose of the name and the energy behind this podcast, right? It's about being raw. It's about being real. And one of the things that I've struggled with the most in my life has been, taking committed action consistently on the things that are going to cause and create the results that I want in my life, and a big part of the results that I want to cause and create in my life are helping other people, which is a big part of this podcast, right? And so over the last couple of days, I've been thinking a lot about like, why have I not set that time aside? Like, why have I not just been like, what about my day popping up? What about my day coming to a conclusion and me looking back and saying like, why could I not set 30-45 minutes aside to sit down and record this episode? What was more important? And I think a big part of it for me was, it's like, man, like, where am I going to go on this episode? Because I knew I wanted to launch my first one just talking, to you guys. The other big thing for me is like connecting with you. It's very easy when I have a guest to be connecting with them here, and like looking at their image on my monitor, but to be really connected to you. And that takes a different level of vulnerability, right? That takes a different level of authenticity. And I think for me specifically, it's not something that I am afraid to do, or not. I don't want to say I'm not afraid, because there's definitely fear there, but it's not something that I'm not okay doing. It's like I really have to drop myself into that space to go there and to do it. What's the word I'm looking for? To do it without any reserves, right? Just all in, full on vulnerability and giving that to you guys. So that's my commitment to you guys today, and that's why I wanted to open up with that. Is like my commitment today in this episode is to dive in and just give you all of me and be very, very vulnerable about what it is I'm sharing about. So that being said, the big thing, that I've been really thinking about this week, guys, has been family stuff, right? And it was cool because if you guys watched last week's episode with Jacob, he talked a lot about being a dad, about being an entrepreneur, about being a husband. Um, and it's funny how, as we open up conversations and like channels for energy in our life, how like we'll go out into the world and the world will kind of mirror those things back to us, right? So last week after I recorded the episode, I literally dropped it the morning I landed in Chicago. So I flew out Thursday night, landed in Chicago like midnight, something like that. And then I was there last week, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then flew home Monday. So I was there for my birthday and then left right before the 4th of July. And this episode dropped on Friday morning at 5 a.m. Pacific time. So it was super funny because what ended up happening was I went into this really incredible experience at home. Got to spend some amazing time with my family. We went out to a Cubs game. It was really cool. My uncle actually got some really incredible tickets, like 9 rows up at Wrigley through his company. So like my whole family got to go. It was like, I don't even know, like $3,000 worth of tickets or something for us to all sit together with these amazing seats. We didn't have to go sit in the nosebleeds or in the bleachers. We all got to have this really incredible experience. So I'm super grateful for that. So Ronnie, if you're listening to this, thank you. I so grateful. I'll always remember that experience, being able to spend that time with my family. 12 of us there, had a great time. Went out for, some famous Pequod's stuffed pizza afterwards, just had a phenomenal experience with everybody. Cubs won. So, go Cubbies. But it was just like, for me, it was just that experience of being able to connect with my family. And it had, I had a couple friends there with me too. And really just being able to like, just be present. Right. And like, just turn off everything else that's going on in my life, everything else that's going on in the world, and just take that, 2 hours and just be there. We got to have a really awesome, like pre-game party at my friend's house on a rooftop there in Wrigleyville, and just vibe, and just, I've realized that I don't have enough of that in my life right now. And it's really important for me to have those moments. And, I just invite you to look at your life right now and say like, like where can I have some more play? Where can I have just some more, just uninhibited, just go out, the thing I love more than anything in my life is family and baseball, sports specifically, but baseball, especially Cubs baseball. And so it was just a really good time to have like two of the things I love the most married together for a while. So that was a great time. But the big thing for me was the next morning, which is really what I'm going to spend most of my time today talking to you guys about, is on Saturday morning, my mother, my stepfather, who, for backstory, is primarily who I lived with as a kid. Right, my mom and my dad got divorced when I was about a year and a half old, or something like that. My mom remarried when I was about 5 or 6 in 1996. So I was like 6, I guess, or 7. And you know, I pretty much grew up with my mom and my stepdad. My dad would pick me up on, every other weekend and Wednesdays. And, they had split custody and whatnot, but I primarily lived with them. And so, through my childhood, there was a lot of ups and downs in my relationship with both my dad and my stepdad. And through that experience as a kid, like, you make up a lot of stories as a kid, right? Like you see something and you take it in and you run with it. Right. And so, really resistant to my stepdad a lot as a kid. He was definitely like a disciplinary force. My mom loved her to death, but I was her baby boy, right? So I got away with a lot of shit with my mom as a kid, and I knew that I could, and so I would probably manipulate her. Or not probably, I definitely manipulated my mom to get what I wanted as a child. And my stepdad was kind of that voice of reason, right? He would step in and create a realistic check for not only myself but for my mom as well. And then my dad and I, that was I always enjoyed spending time with my dad. Like we always had fun. So it was like sports based, activity based. Me and my dad would always have a good time. When he would pick me up or I'd be at his house for the weekend, it was always like a vacation, I guess you could say, right? And my dad always gave me good insight when I was with him. He talked to me a lot about character. He talked to me a lot about going to school and getting a good education and going to college, which I didn't do. Chose a different path, but he always had some really good insight for me. But on the other hand, like as much as my life at home with my mom and my stepdad was very real, it's like where I was going to school, it's where I was being held responsible, it's where I was being disciplined. My time with my dad seemed like more my freedom, right? It was like I got to have a good time. I got to, because it was fewer time, right? So it was always more of a fun experience, like laid back. but in addition to that, my dad, as when, and especially in my younger years, was dealing with a lot of his own things, right? As we all do. And so, um, there came times where, I was supposed to spend time with my dad, and he wouldn't show up to pick me up, or he would have to cancel or reschedule. And my dad, being the man that he was looking to, my mom had been remarried, my dad was dating, and things like that. And sometimes I think those things kind of took precedent over me. And this is by no means a jab at my father. That's just the season of his life he was going through, right? And it's easy to say now, but as a kid, like a lot, you make up a lot of stories. It's like, I don't feel important. I missed him. I felt like left out. I felt like I don't unloved, unappreciated, whatever. But you know, as those experiences continued to happen, I started to really create some massive stories in my head about some stuff. And you know, what ended up happening was I became really resentful of my dad the older I got, because I didn't feel like I was a priority in my dad's life. And my dad was fighting his own demons, but as a kid, you don't see that. And so, I started to create some stories. So I really struggled with both of my fathers, because my dad was like my freedom, and I wasn't getting that with him. And then at home, my stepdad was disciplining and laying down the law. It's not like he was just always that way, but like, I didn't have that level of respect for him, because as a kid, um, I really just, I wanted the freedom that I wasn't getting. If I wasn't getting it, I would find a way to try to get it, and that would create problems as a kid, right? Because there's rules, right? There's disciplinary actions that are being put in place. And so around like 13 years old or so is when my grandmother passed away. She got really sick and passed away, and that was really when I started to rebel. So all of that anger and frustration that I had about my grandma passing away, and then any resentment I had toward my dad's, just got magnified. So I really started pushing back on my stepdad at home. And then I really just started to get very cocky and very outspoken to my real father, my biological father, about certain things. And I just got very volatile with him. And some of it, I'm sure, was like, in a sense, like validated or justified, but a lot of it was also just me being a teenager in his um puberty years, where I was just very hormonal and very upset and very emotional. And that's really when I started drinking. For you, those of you who don't know my story, like, drugs and alcohol, a huge part of my life, right? So that's when I really started drinking and diving into drugs and alcohol. Um, and so, yeah, those things kind of just created this like perfect storm of just like absolute rebellion. And that's when I started like sneaking out at night, and my dad would show up at my house to try to connect with me, and I would essentially tell my biological father to like get fucked and like take a hike, because I just was in full rebellion. And I know that created a lot of pain for my dad, and I'm sure a lot of it, uh ruffled up some of the shame and guilt he had for the times where he didn't show up the way that he would have hoped to, right? And he would have wanted to as a dad. And so, I could tell that created a lot of issues for our relationship. And I felt like empowered and like confident by like being like, "Ugh," get out of my face. But at the same time, it was just really because I was hurting, right? I was sad. I didn't know how to express myself, right? I didn't know how to vulnerably talk about my feelings and what was going on. And it wasn't because my parents didn't try to provide a space for me to do that, but as 13, 14, 15-year old boy, you don't know how to do that. And when you start using drugs and alcohol and relationships and girls and attention and older friends to kind of cope and soothe with those feelings that you're having, I was picking up behavioral defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms that didn't really serve the problem as much as it kind of enhanced it, right? And made the problem even worse for me. So long story short, and we'll dive more into my story as this time goes on, but over those like 4 years, from 13, 14, all the way until about 17, 18, I was very rebellious. Me and my dad's relationship was very, very rocky. I was getting more and more, as the years went on through high school, more and more rebellious, more and more, I was behaving more and more, hanging out with the wrong guys, the wrong kids. And my drinking and drugging definitely took a precedent in my life. And so by the time I was like 17, almost 18, I had pretty much just in full flight of, of discipline, and I ended up moving out before I even turned 18. And so my life just snowballed from there. My relationship with my dad became non-existent at that point. You know, um, my relationship with my mom and my stepdad, it was toxic because I would talk to my mom, but I was very like, it was like I would call my mom to like vent and get all of my shit off my chest just so I could feel better about myself, and then go back out of my life. And probably I was like taking all my crap and like dumping it on my mom's lap and being like, oh, I feel better. And now she's like sitting at home freaking out. And I, at that point, it was moving all around, right? So I grew up in Chicago, and I'm in Florida or New York or LA or Vegas or whatever. I was moving all over the country just to have fun and experience whatever I was experiencing. And at the age of about 20, my grandfather passed away, who was, as a child, like the the father figure that I chose. Even though I had my stepdad and my dad and other men in my life, like my grandfather was it for me. And he was my best friend, and I loved him more than anything in the world. And losing him was very, very hard for me. Like losing my grandma, she was like the rock, you know, or like actually no, she was like the glue that kept the family together. Um, and my grandfather was like the rock, like the pillar. And yeah, so when he passed away, I was already on super thin ice with my addiction and mental health stuff. That really sent me off the deep end. Um, and so while I was in Chicago, this conversation came up. I mean, I was so resentful against my dad, and so much hatred just of everything, and so much, why me? Why is this happening to me? That at my grandfather's funeral, my dad showed up, and I very quickly, this is my mom's dad, so I very quickly asked my relative of my family to have my father escorted out of the funeral, just out of sheer like, just arrogance. Like I was like, how it was, in my mind, I was like, who the fuck do you think you are showing up here? Because I was so resentful and so angry that I had like lost him, and hated my life and where I was, and didn't know how to process my feelings toward him. I like had him removed, which is, at 20, and I was not even sober at my grandfather's funeral, but like at that time, it could just seem like the right thing to do. Like it was like, how dare you do this to me and show your face here? Like, which it's like disrespectful to my mom's family, like being that he was like my mom's ex-husband, and like me and my dad were in a good relationship. And it was like, looking back at that, I just like, I couldn't believe somebody would have the audacity to show up. And I remember his mom and his grandmother were there. And they were so disappointed in me, like they came up to me and expressed their disappointment, and it didn't even really bother me. Like, I mean, when they expressed their disappointment in me, I was just kind of like, okay, cool. Sorry you feel that way. You know what I mean? But I think at that point in time, it was just me having some sense of control over the situation. It gave me some sort of say in what was going on, because I felt like everything was just completely out of touch and out of control, and it was like everything was unraveling, and this gave me some sense of control. And uh so yeah, that was kind of a crazy moment that came up in conversation this weekend between me and, I think it was my mom or my aunt. I was like, man, if I could, or my uncle, because I think it was my uncle I asked to have him remove my dad, because he was like the biggest guy in my family. And I just went back and thought about that. I was like, man, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have done that, because being an adult now, I'm looking at like, okay, like the whole reason that he came there was to provide one, to give his condolences, right? I mean, that man played a role in my dad's life. Like, he had a child with that man's daughter. You know what I mean? Like he was married to that man's daughter. So it's like, it was him just being a good human. And to me, it was like disrespect at that point in time. And so it was very wild to look back at that and think like, man. And like, to be honest with you, it's funny now that I talk about it, I don't even know if I've ever even addressed this with my dad, which I'm sure he'll listen to this. And so I definitely get to like have a conversation with him about this. Because through my journey of sobriety, I've made amends to my father. I don't know if I think that was something that like I never really addressed, because it was something that I kind of just shut out that I did. It just came up randomly in conversation this weekend. So that's funny. So I get to, I get to dive into that with him. But, kind of going back to my point, as an adult, looking back at this, it was like, wow, like I can see why he was there. And it was like, that was such a big move for him as a human being to like show up there, being where our relationship was at that point in time, to have the courage and the compassion to show up, and then to be like escorted off. Like that must have been really hard for him. So on a very public platform, Dad, I am so sorry that my childness and my immaturity at that point in time in my life and my addiction got in between you and doing what you felt was right in your heart. But yeah, that's crazy. So that all being said, right? I mean, I went on a tear after that for 5, 6 more years. I mean, it just got worse, right? And about 5 years later, through a very unique experience with a very unexpected individual in my life, I was encouraged strongly to reach out to my father by somebody that I did not have a good relationship with, that was not a very like appropriate person to have a conversation with my dad about, considering the context of our relationship, which I'll dive into another time. But um, yeah, I ended up reaching out to him on Facebook, and so after years of not talking to my dad, not being close to my dad, I ended up reaching out to him on Facebook. My dad, living in the sticks in Missouri, doesn't have like a computer at his house, didn't have like a smartphone. So it took him a while to even see the message. I messaged him right around his birthday, which is January 1st on New Year's. And about 6 weeks later, the irony of this is I was sitting in a emotional intelligence kind of transformational program, and they were talking that the topic of parenting or parents, your relationship with your parents, came up. This was on Valentine's Day, I remember very vividly. And as we started diving into this conversation about parents and our relationships with our parents, I get a notification on my phone, and it was a reply to the message I had sent to my dad 6 weeks prior. And it was just like this really big God moment, right? This really big universe, like, bing, here you go. And I remember raising my hand, and I told the instructor, hey, like, my dad just reached out to me during this segment, and I haven't talked to him in years, and I've been very resentful. And I had messaged him 6 weeks ago. And it's just very ironic that he messaged me, and he's like, you're going to go outside and you're going to call your dad right now. And I was just like, get fucked. There's no way that's happening. And he's like, yeah, it is. Like, it's happening. And I was just like, no shot. And then he's like, so he coached me through some stuff. And so long story short, I ended up calling my mom first, because my mom was still like my best friend, right? Even through all the bullshit. And I knew I could call her and talk to her about it. And so I did. I called her. I had a conversation with her. And then I called my dad. And that was the first time me and my dad had talked in a long time. And we just connected. I'll be honest with you. I was in such a weird haze in my life. I wasn't even sober during that transformation leadership thing. So it was kind of like counterintuitive that I was doing it. But I obviously something really beautiful came out of it. It was intended to happen. But we ended up talking, and we started kind of just pen paling, I guess you could say, texting back and forth, talking back and forth. And about 4 months later, my dad came out to visit me. I think it was about 4 months later. It was either June of that year or June of the next year. I can't recall. But long story short, my dad came out and visited me. And I think it was 4 months later. But either way, he did come out and visit me. And it was the first time I'd seen my dad, spent time with him. It was 4 months later. It was in 2014. And so really awesome experience. I got to connect with him and hang out with him and just really have this really bizarre, crazy experience in my life. And I still wasn't sober. So I was very much like, this is wild, right? And long story short, over the next year, me and my dad, we talked more. I actually went out and visited him and his wife with my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and our dogs. And we went out and did a little trip. And by that time I was getting sober. I wasn't sober yet, but I ended up getting sober in October 2015. And then from there, my relationship with my dad just really blossomed. We have worked through so much stuff, and my dad and I both, I went through a transformational leadership, another course when I was sober called Ascension Leadership Academy in San Diego. They have another location in Austin. Shout out to Brad Ballard and Jenna Phillips Ballard. I had a phenomenal experience there. My brother Kason and introduced me to that, and I had just a life altering experience. And a few years later, I enrolled my dad into that course. He went through it. And from there, our relationship has just really blossomed because we got to let go of so much guilt and shame and resentment and pain and just things that like really have held us down in our life. And it's a big part of the reason I'm so passionate about this. I mean, that's where turning pain into purpose stemmed from. Right. And so long story short, me and my dad really started growing into our relationship. And, it's just like one thing after the next. I remember being like, oh, well, me and my dad's never like, we're going to go play catch in the park. We're adults now. Like, I'm not sure. It'll be probably more like a long distance friendship. I said that like early on. And then I remember like within a few months of me and my dad talking again, and when he visited me again in San Diego, and I was like playing basketball with him and I was just like, am I playing basketball with my dad? Like, how crazy is this shit? You know what I mean? And so we've had just multiple experiences like that. It's been absolutely phenomenal. And, I'm just so grateful, and it was just so, reflecting on that relationship with my dad, listening to, Jacob on the last episode talk about his relationship, with being a dad, right. Having his son, but also his relationship with his dad. And it kind of brings me back to, why this really came up for me in the first place was, is like, our perspective as children of our parents is so dramatically different than when we're adults. Because like now I look back at whatever the fuck my dad was doing when I was born. I mean, who even gives a shit? I'm sure there was all sorts of, foul play or whatever you want to call it, because he was like, dude, I think about myself at like, my dad was born in 1964. I was born in 1989. So what, he was 25 years old. I think about myself at 25. I was in absolutely no fucking condition to be taking care of a child. I was not prepared to do that type of thing. And I look at, what my dad was doing. And I was just like, I fucking get it, dude. You know what I mean? I get it. And he wanted to, I know he wanted to, but I'm sure he was getting tugged in two different directions, but as a kid, it's like, I took everything fucking personal. It was like, it was happening to me, and, yeah, man, it's so cool to look back at it. So that all being said, and we'll hear more and more details about all this good stuff as time goes on. But the big thing I want to highlight is the transformation, turning pain into purpose, right? On the week or two leading up to me going out to Chicago, I told my dad and my mom and my stepdad, I said, hey, I really want to organize having brunch with you guys, with everybody. We, as far as I know, have never sat down, all four of us, and had a meal ever. I mean, most of our interactions as a, as a collective between my mom, my stepdad, myself, and my dad was like him picking me up and him being like, oh yeah, hey, how you guys doing? Good, like small talk, bullshit, whatever. And then him leaving, and then like vice versa. Like so anytime you pick me up or drop me off, we didn't have like, uh, collaborative birthday parties for me as a kid. It was always like mom's side, dad's side, dad's Christmas, mom's Christmas, shit like that. And so sitting down and having that experience on Saturday, the day after my birthday, was just so profound, and it was just like, I just remember like I sat there and I was just like, how fucking blessed am I to have walked through all the shit that I've walked through and to have this experience, you know what I mean? To be able to sit down with my mom, my stepdad, and my father and just connect and like talk about life. And like my dad talked about what he loves and like where he lives, and like, he lives down in Missouri. He's talking about fishing with my stepdad. My stepdad's a huge fishing enthusiast, goes on all these trips, and he actually fishes on a lot of lakes that are kind of by my dad, which is crazy, like Table Rock and Bull Shoals and stuff down in Arkansas and in the southwest Missouri. And it's just crazy, and it was just so cool to sit there and have that experience. And like, I'm sure it's a trip for my mom to have that too, because man, so many years of fighting and like my mom trying to protect me from having resentment against my dad, wanting me to have a healthy relationship with him. I remember like when I was a kid, I'd be like, fuck you, I fucking hate this house, I fucking hate you, blah, blah, blah. I'm moving, I'm gonna go stay with my dad. And my mom's just like, okay, you know what I mean? And like, I'm sure my mom's carrying all of her own feelings about my father at that time. And then she's like, I remember one time, like, she's like, fine, fucking go, like, go live with your dad, I don't care, like, have a good time. And then I was just like, I wasn't expecting that reaction from her. And then I just started freaking out because like, at that point, like, I didn't know if that's what I wanted to do. Like, my mom's house was my home, my dad's house was definitely like homey to me, but my mom's house was my home. And so, my mom, being a single mom for a little while, and then a remarried mother of a single, like, only child, maneuvering through your own feelings and I'm sure she was maneuvering through my stepdad's feelings about my dad and the whole situation. My dad also was raised by his stepdad primarily, so he probably had his own feelings about dads in general, because him and his dad didn't have a good relationship. And I remember I always kind of sought, like, my stepdad didn't talk to his dad at all through my whole childhood. And so I just remember being like, when I got resentment towards my dad, I was like, oh, well, it's okay for my stepdad to not talk to his dad. I don't want to talk to my dad. I don't want to have a relationship with him. You know what I mean? And like, I use that as like a justifier, and it was just so funny how that shit works. It's a trip. But I got to sit down and have that meal, and I got to get a photo with the four of them, which I will cherish forever, because, man, you never know, it's been such a crazy time in the last like couple of years. I've lost so many people. You don't know, you just don't fucking know. And I'm just so grateful I got to have that experience, because whether it's 25 years from now or 30 years from now that I like lose my parents, or tomorrow if I lost a parent, I will always have that we were able to get to that point. Like, we were able to have that. We were able to sit down and just, it wasn't even like, oh, let's rehash any of the bullshit. It's like, dude, here we are. You know what I mean? Like, here we are, here's what we're doing. This is who we are today. And that's all the things that have developed and happened and occurred over the last 3 decades have just gotten us, 3.5 decades, geez, have gotten us to where we are today. And they were necessary steps for us to have what we have now. And that's what this is all about, turning pain into purpose, right? It's about having the opportunity to walk through a series of events to take something away from it to create a better outcome. And it's not always going to happen on our timeline. It's not always going to look the way that we want it to look, right? It's going to develop as the universe, as God sees fit. And that's exactly what happened with this. And it was just such a just a mind-blowing experience, man. Because if that can happen with me, with like the most important people in your life, right? Your parents are like the most important people in your life, whether they're here, they're not here, they're alive, they're passed away. The significance of that relationship, whether it is consistent or not, is the most important, because it shapes you, it molds you. You learn, you are part of them and they are part of you, and you grow based off of your DNA and your surroundings as a kid and all these different things. So they are pivotal regardless of their participation or your participation, and what the status of that relationship looks like. And so I'm just so grateful. And the older I get, the more I see my dad and me, right? And I remember, dude, I had so many fucking stories about like who my dad was and stuff as a kid. And I remember I was so angry for like no reason other than just like not feeling good enough because he like didn't pick me up when he was supposed to, or whatever the fuck, but like going back now, like looking back in time, is like, if I had like a 5-year-old or 7-year-old son or something, and like my priorities were like, I got a girlfriend and my buddies want to go out, and it's like, hey, like, it's not like I'm a shitty person for wanting to spend time with my friends or my girlfriend. It's just, you got to make a decision, right? And as a kid, I didn't see that as like a decision. I saw it as like abandonment. I felt abandoned. I felt not cared about. And it was just like my dad just like was growing a relationship and wanted to have some fun. You know what I mean? Like, how many times I chose to go do something fucking over what I, to experience dopamine and serotonin in my body rather than like the responsible thing to do, no matter what like the weight of that thing was. But like, man, as a kid, you make up all these stories, and then as adults, I look back and I was like, I probably would have done the same fucking thing. I probably have done the same fucking thing a million times over. Even after somebody expressed like, oh, I really wish you would have done X, Y, Z, I've probably done that same thing, particularly in my relationship with my wife, 1,000 times, yeah, so it's just a trip, man. It's just such a trip. But I forgot where I was going with that, but I just, I just remember expending so much energy, and then now looking back at it, it's just like, and that shit fucking matters. I needed all that. I needed to be in that in that energy to experience it, and then to be on the other side of it and just realize like, dude, it doesn't matter, and damn, like for me, selfish activities were always backed by fulfillment. Like it was fulfillment and feeling fucking just better, whatever it was, whether it was drugs, alcohol, sex, money, what, renting the better. I remember, Dan, every time I used to rent a car back in the day, I was making money, but I wasn't making like the money. I was like, very childish with the way I spent money. So I would like upgrade my rental car just to have like a cool GT Mustang just because I wanted it, not because I could afford it. I mean, I could like technically afford it, I had the cash, but like I just did it to like feel cool. You know what I mean? I was constantly seeking validation. Yeah. I mean, I remember using, oh, I remember where I was going with that story. And so, yeah, like I remember I used to make up all these stories about my dad, right? About how I'd feel about my dad, who my dad was, blah, 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 blah. And I remember, I was so hesitant to talk about this because I remember I thought about this earlier and I was so hesitant to talk about it. But like I said at the beginning of this call, I'm going to be real. I remember like I wanted to do all things to avoid being like my dad. Um, and I think as a toxic young man that does not have any sense of emotional intelligence whatsoever, or actualization of like what my dad was going through and who he was as a person, I was just like it was my simple perspective and resentful, hormone driven one at that. I just remember like I don't want to be my dad, and I always told my parents I'm never gonna smoke cigarettes like you guys. I'm not gonna drink and do drugs like my dad did. Blah blah blah. Like I always fucking had all these like definitives, like I'm never going to do this. And I remember one time I was like in a full blown meth psychosis, and I like looked in the mirror and I saw my like dad's face transpire onto my face, like in a psychosis hallucination, right? I saw that and it freaked me out. It freaked me out because, and it's not like my dad's a bad person, right? Like I want to be very clear that that is not how I see my dad. It was just in that moment, that was like my greatest fear, because I had in some way, shape, or form created this like monster in my mind of who he was. And it was just because this little boy inside of me had this thing that he wanted that he didn't get, but my dad has a little boy inside of him that was like looking for something for himself too, that he was striving for, he needed, that he was looking for in other places than his relationship with me at times. And so I took it personal. And I'm sure my dad could share tons of fucking stories about that with his parents, because that's really what it always boils down to. But yeah, my dad has the same little boy inside of him that I have inside of me, and it's like that wasn't being met. There was something that was missing, so I made up all these stories, and my dad was just out like living his life, and he had a little boy in him that needed something, needed love or validation, or to feel like he was enough, or whatever, and his ego was working against him every fucking chance he had, just like mine was. My ego is so fucking good at like I think about myself this way, so then I'll take actions that create a result to validate or justify or confirm the feeling that I have about myself, and make myself right about what a fucking loser I am, you know? And if I had to guess, which I don't like to project, but if I had to guess, I'm sure at some point my dad's life, he probably didn't feel like a great dad. And so sometimes you'd make choices to do things that would make him a bad dad, rather than a responsible one. So he would like choose to go out with his girlfriend over picking me up, or whatever the fuck he did. I don't know what that looked like all the time because I wasn't there. I was just at home, not getting picked up and making up fucking stories about it. So your ego is not your amigo, right? And I'm sure there was a lot of experiences like that, because man, I can't tell you how many times in my adult life, at this point, I would have been, if I had a kid when my dad had me, I'd be like, I'd have a 9-year-old son right now. So same time fucking frame. But I was fortunate enough to get sober at 26 and like have tons of tools that like our generations before us didn't fucking have. You know what I mean? Like emotional intelligence and transformational trainings and workshops and conscious mindfulness and Alcoholics Anonymous and all these amazing things that I have in my life. But in no way, shape, or fucking form was I prepared to handle any of that shit 5, 6, 7 years ago, right? Even in sobriety, not ready. And so through my experiences, not as a dad, but as a husband, as a friend, as an entrepreneur, man, like how many times have I had a story in my mind about like, oh, I'm not good enough. Just like this fucking podcast, man. God, you know how long I've been wanting to do this shit, and it's just like my ego is just like, no, no, it doesn't look right. Like it's not going to be good enough. How are you going to sit? Before this call, man, I was like, how the fuck am I going to sit down and just talk to my mic and my monitor for 45 minutes? We're at 40 minutes, and I could keep talking for like an hour. And I remember having that come up, and it's just every opportunity that my ego has to make me right about the limiting beliefs that I have, it will. And if I don't take a committed action and persevere and break through that thought, I will stay exactly the same, right? And until the pain, I think this is originally Tony Robbins who said this, but I heard it through a good friend of mine, and I could almost positive it's Tony Robbins. But until the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of change, one will stay the same, right? So until it's less uncomfortable to change than it is to stay exactly how I am, I won't change. And so through a series of experiences in my life, my dad's life, my parents' life, my mom and my stepdad's life, everybody's life, changes happen. And I got to sit down on a Saturday morning and have fucking brunch with them and just soak in the magic of that. It's fucking phenomenal. And man, it's so crazy sitting here talking to you guys like this, because I remember watching Eric's podcast, especially his monologues, and I had so much respect for him and his ability to just sit down and just share so vulnerably. And I remember I shared about this in my episode with Gianna. Eric used to always say like how much he looked up to me and how much I inspired him. And I thought he was so full of shit because he was like doing the thing that I didn't have the courage to do, which was this. But I'm sitting here and I'm doing it. And I'm realizing like he saw in me what I didn't see in myself at that point in time. And it's like that like I can absolutely provide value, and I can do the thing that he can do that I thought I didn't have the courage to do because he was different than me. He had walked through different experiences than me. I thought he had something I didn't have, right? But he just made a choice to do it. And how powerful to sit here and just process, right? And not care about what it looks like. And not care about if somebody's fucking feelings get hurt, Because like, if I talked about you in this episode and your feelings got hurt, fucking call me and we'll talk about it. Because I don't hate you. I'm not mad at you. I certainly don't resent you. I'm grateful for each and every person that I talked about, That's what this is all about. This is all about healing and processing. If we didn't go through the shit that we went through, we wouldn't be who we are today, right? And it's all necessary. It's all happening for us, whether we choose to believe that or not. In the moment, it is. And the sooner that we wrap our head around that, and the more consistent we get about being, shifting from victim to leader, right? And when something happens, as soon as I see it, like, okay, like, why is this happening? If I could just ask that question, like, why is this happening for me? How is this happening for me? Rather than why the fuck is this happening to me? And it can be with anything, I mean, shit, last night our dog was in the fucking vet for 6 hours. We had to go to the emergency vet. And I was like, why the fuck is this happening? Like, why, dude, we got our dog, one dog needs to get a fucking ACL surgery. It's going to cost like $5,000. Now you need to go to the vet. It's going to cost $1,000. And like 6 hours of our time sitting in the emergency vet. I was like, maybe I just needed 6 hours to like sit with my wife in a fucking waiting room and just shoot the shit and laugh and giggle and like care for our, our fur baby together. You know what I mean? Maybe I just needed to not do this podcast one more night because I was supposed to do it last night so I could be who I needed to be today and have the clarity of mind to sit down and share the way I am with you. Maybe there was something I wasn't going to say yesterday that I'm saying today because I had that time to reflect. I don't fucking know, man. But that's the journey. That's what we're doing here, So that's pretty much all I got for you guys today. And man, life is a beautiful thing when we choose to look at it. And if you, I've always wanted to, I'll be straight up with you guys. I wanted to journal for like a long time. It's really been hard for me to sit down and journal. I don't do it much. I'm much more of a conversationalist than a write pen and paper person. This is so fucking good for me to sit down and do with you guys. And I just want to share that with you because I want you to know, like if there's something that you want to do that you feel inspired to do that you're scared to do, go fucking do it. Because like, yeah, like is this for you guys? 100%. But like, here's a little secret for you. It's for me too. Like I'm getting so much from sitting here and doing this, and just I can feel it in my body, like on a molecular biological level in my body. My body is like, thank you for fucking doing this. It's healthy, and there's so much that gets to be discharged. The same reason we need to put our feet on bare soil and ground. This is a grounding exercise for me, right? To get all this out and give it purpose, right? Rather than just hold on to it or for myself. So thank you guys. Thank you for continuing to show up. Thank you for understanding why this wasn't launched on Friday morning. Thank you for continuing to show up and just listen and apply something, take something away, whatever it looks like for you. I'm grateful for you guys. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this. I'm grateful that I have the ability to do this, not only like the technology and all the other shit, but I'm grateful for my ability to talk, to use my voice, to speak, and to be afforded the capability of doing it and the opportunity to do it, and then having the courage and the tools to step into this space and just share with you guys. So that being said, huge shout out to my family. For anybody that's listening to this, Dad, I love you with all my heart. I'm super grateful that we have what we have today. It's an absolutely magnificent, beautiful thing. I wouldn't have it any other way. No such thing as time wasted. This has been exactly what we had over all those years, was to give us the gratitude that we have for each other today. So thank you. And to my mom, you're like my number one fan, and I love you more than anything in the world. I'm just so grateful for you and your perseverance through your life, as a mom, as a wife, as a human being with your own struggles with the things that you've walked through, grief, being having brain surgery. I mean, you're just a badass. I'm super grateful for you. And Brad, dude, thank you, my stepdad, for just stepping up to the plate and just being like the lighthouse for my mom's entire family and yours, and through so much hard times, man. You are just a fucking beast, and I'm so grateful for the role that you played, not only my childhood as a stepfather, but as a man in my family. I can't imagine somebody else stepping in and marrying my mom for her second marriage and providing the way that you have. You really just took it on. I mean, man, it's like you've been fucking phenomenal. And for everybody else in my family, thank you. My wife, we haven't even started talking about that, guys. Yeah, but so much, so much there that has shaped me and continues to shape me as I move forward. So just, Ashley, thank you for your support. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much. Be sure to share this, comment, please. It means so much to me. And I mean, like, I would love that, to get this out to more people, not because I'm not making any money from this. This isn't a monetary thing. Like, I just want people to really just take away from this, right? Like to like implement this in life. So the more you share this, the more you talk about it, the more you comment on it, the more engagement we get on these, right now on YouTube and Spotify, the more of an impact we can make with this. So please, 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 please let this be magnified in the lives of other people. And again, just thank you guys for showing up and for participating in your own life and the lives of others. And until then, stay blessed. So I love you guys.